Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded. This will be a follow-on from the previous video I uploaded on the Corinthian order, ancient origins, and the architect Callimachus. Now at the end of that I said I would do a separate video on the broken column, which is usually more than often linked to the Corinthian capital, the Weeping Virgin, but also how it connects to funerary symbolisms. This also links very strongly to esoteric traditions. Most people have heard of the Freemasons, but there are other mutual aid societies, like a whole part of history which has been polluted and written out of history because of the danger I would say it poses to those in power, and so it's been demonized. But the Corinthian capital and also the acanthus. So this is an example of the broken column, and you can see Corinthian column and the Weeping Virgin symbol. This is from the Sydney Masonic Centre Museum, and the emblems in there, things we'll explore because it's a connected series of pattern and I'll be talking about Freemasonry, but you'll also find it in just general ritual symbolism history that's come down to us today. And it does very strongly relate to the ancient Greco-Roman traditions and order and legends, who themselves, and they don't make a secret of it, but they draw upon older civilizations. So if you're in the old Roman texts, they speak about how the Greeks and the Romans learnt through Egypt, such as at Heliopolis, but also via the Chaldeans, which were simply call them the Babylonians. And so these symbols here in the internet style are sort of been demonized, but they are not specifically only Freemasonic. They're broadly speaking part of our cultural heritage. And a very important feature is this plant here, the acanthus plant. That will be a strong theme running through this, because the acanthus was the inspiration for the Corinthian order and the connection to funerary symbols. The acanthus plant traditionally was a funerary plant, but it's not as popular as it formerly was. So firstly, let's do a quick review of the origin of the Corinthian column and the column capital especially, and how it relates to the three Greek orders of architecture, Doric being the first, then Ionic, and then Corinthian. And okay, now where we see examples of those columns. Doric, the male, said to be the most masculine, the column of strength. It's broader, as where the Ionic is a taller, more slender column. The swirls at the top said to represent the more simple hairstyle design of the woman, the more mature woman, as where that's the column of wisdom, as where the Corinthian is the column of beauty connected to the maiden, which has a much more elaborate design. We can see these, for instance, again in Freemason tracing boards, also Oddfellows, Buffaloes, these other esoteric mutual aid societies rich in symbolism. And the two outermost columns are pretty obvious, but there is a third column there in the center, the Ionic column. You can see those swirls there just beneath that candelabra, and that is represented wisdom, strength, and beauty as well in that Masonic tradition. On the left we see an ancient Corinthian column capital from the Pantheon in Rome. Pardon, on the right, more modern version from the 1800s over here in Sydney at the State Library of New South Wales. But the defining feature of any Corinthian is the acanthus leaf design. So we see an acanthus next to a large column capital. I believe that's in Rome at Palatine Hill. It might also be in Greece, but both in Greece and in Italy, across the Mediterranean, acanthus does grow wild. Two main forms to consider when looking at a Corinthian is the acanthus mollis or acanthus spinosa. and here in Sydney in Hyde Park. It's not a native to Australia, but it's interesting where I found this plant. But here's an example of acanthus leaf and a Corinthian capital, or a half capital. I think they're called pilasters. I forget the official name, but you can see how the acanthus leaf design connects there. And that brings us to the origin story of how this was developed. And there you can see on the right the crater, or the like an upside down bell-shaped jar. It could have been weaved, but there's also pottery, there's also stoneware from the time of that shape. And evolution of the capital. There are certain themes that are necessary in the Corinthian. People like Vitruvius specify a certain proportion, but even Vitruvius will say these are not, pardon the pun, written in stone, and different temples, different designers, architects would vary their design, but also the proportions, how high the column capitals are. But it's the fabled origin and how this was developed, again, from the crater, the bell-shaped jar with a roof tile on top, which was placed as a grave marker on top of a grave of a maiden, of a virgin who died suddenly. And then when the spring time came, the acanthus grew from underneath this jar. The acanthus is a very hardy plant. You have to sort of dig them out from the roots because they will re-emerge year after year. And that brings us to the story of the famed sculptor, architect Callimachus, who is said to have developed this design. Book 10, Vitruvius, talks about this, and he gives a story as well, but this is not his story. There are older Greek writings, but the good thing about Vitruvius, the 10 books of architecture, it's a compendium, an encyclopedia of Greco-Roman philosophy on architecture, design, chemistry, how to make pozzolano, the cement, also the machines for lifting and these types of things. But let's just review that acanthus story, because it's an important reference in Corinthian, how the acanthus plant Corinthian connects to the Weeping Virgin and funerary symbolism that was very popular, but sort of has drifted out from the traditional funeral and the design of buildings as well. The origin story of the Corinthian capital begins with a maiden, a girl of unmarried age, a freeborn maiden of Corinth. She became ill and she died suddenly. Her nurse took her favourite things, placed them in the crater, this, whether it was a woven basket or a piece of pottery. It's like an upside down bell type of shape. So she placed all her favourite things in there and put a tile on top to preserve those things a little bit longer. She was unaware that underneath was an acanthus root. This grew out, so when, as is the way with acanthus, spring and summer, the root re-emerged and the plant grew from there. Now, because of the shape of the crater and the tile on top, this caused the leaves to curl and to form around, and that led to that's the origin of the Corinthian capital. But it's a grave marker, and it's a symbol of rejuvenation. So the winter, but then the acanthus re-emerges. It's quite a hardy plant as well. So there is a connection to the Corinthian origins, to the maiden and to the grave marker, and of course the Corinthian capital being the column of beauty, or the column of the maiden. And that was a story of how Callimachus was inspired to create this design, which again is an important theme to other symbols related to funerary items. The broken Corinthian column is most often depicted, and the use of acanthus, especially in funerary symbolism. So here we see an animated version of the Corinthian column, but it's the connection, very important one, is to the acanthus plant. Once you start seeing the acanthus, not just the literal plant in key locations, I might add, at least here in Australia, but I have noticed it elsewhere, but Also acanthus-based decoration as they appear elsewhere. Once you start to see it, you'll be seeing it everywhere. And just again, to show the comparison, how the acanthus leaf is literally with no ambiguousness, is the origin, the basis of Corinthian designs, not just the capitals but the broader temples themselves. Okay, so now we can start to look back on these, and what's the main theme of this video will be the broken column and the weeping virgin. So we'll be looking at an image like these. So again, with the scythe, notice behind the scythe there's an hourglass, there are 3 steps, and there's the broken Corinthian column. And again, many rich layers especially amongst esoteric traditions, religious, but also just the symbols and traditions of funerals and of mortality as well, which have ancient origins that are passed on to the modern, so pagan origins through to the Christian era. This is from the Sydney Masonic Centre Museum. Again, broken column, 3 steps, the book, she's holding an urn, acacia in there, and again, Father Time with the hourglass and the scythe. So let's now have a look and comparison of these things. Callimachus, the acanthus and the crater, the grave marker, and the origins of the Corinthian order. So as we mentioned, the 3 Greek orders of architecture, and how these are also common themes in esoteric organisations and symbols. So now we come to the maiden, the virgin, whose grave gave the inspiration via acanthus for the Corinthian order. The weeping virgin now we see in the centre, which is a key symbol, multi-layered symbol, for instance, in Freemasons, but there's mentions, strong connections to the Bible will be in there as well, and this Corinthian order, which goes back to the BCE or BC, however you prefer that era as well. And this will be I've done other videos as well, how let's just call it pre-Jesus pagan symbolism is throughout the Bible, and also carries on through to churches and religions in a much broader context than that. But that's algorithm stuff, let's not go there for a moment. So here are some examples of, I think a couple of them are tarots as well, but you see the broken column, especially connected to the female and the woman. It's a multi-layered thing. I could connect it also to alchemy and some other features as well, but this is an example. Now here's this is from a gravestone. You really would need to look up Weeping Virgin, broken column symbols. It's a lot of writing, a lot of interpretation in there. So again, I'm sort of just covering it. You really would need to dig a little bit deeper to satisfy yourself if you want to go a little bit further. But this is an important symbol, and we'll look at some of those layers. It's a funerary symbol. That's the main feature for the moment, and connected with esoteric organisations now. So we have the Weeping Virgin. We have a broken, and more often than not, a broken Corinthian column, and because of the acanthus connection to there, and the Virgin and the grave, and the symbolism in regards to acanthus as rejuvenation as well, because it's a very hardy plant. Once it's planted, you really have to dig out all the roots. It comes back very strong. There is a lot of history in regards to that, but that's a very long, much overlooked history. It's one of those things just hiding in plain sight. But you'll also see on top of the column, either in this case we see a scroll or a book. These are also important hermetic symbols that you will find related, especially to, let's call it secret societies, as might be said these days. But remember, we're very literate these days, but we've lost our symbolic literacy for the most part. And so again, not too long ago, it was either the oral tradition or things were written in a symbolic way rather than a literal way. Now the Virgin will often hold, or should hold, either a sprig or a branch of acacia. That's an important reflection of, especially connected to Hiram Abiff. We'll touch on that in a moment, but it's very important in biblical stonemason, Freemason tradition as well. Now she's always accompanied with Father Time, let's just call him, and he's carrying the scythe, which, just like the Grim Reaper, it's a symbol of harvest, but also a symbol connected to death. And it's important to remember that the Grim Reaper is not a benevolent figure. Death is part of life, and he sort of does his job. He's not trying to kill you early. It's just when it's your time. So the Grim Reaper is now associated with a sort of bad thing, but that's just part of life. And again, not too long ago, people were much more. People just tended to die. You had high infant mortality, and maybe people embraced death a little too much. And especially like the Victorian era and the fascination with those morbid photos of the dead and stuff. But now we've gone the opposite direction, where just like we pretend that this doesn't exist, but it's just a cycle of life. Like I heard, was it on a movie just recently? But even the king dies, he feeds the worms feed the birds feed the king feeds the worms, type of thing. So, could do the Lion King's circle of life. That's how things go. Now, with the scythe, you'll also see the hourglass. Think of the phrase of the sands of time. Time, mortality. So symbols of mortality would be a more pleasant way to say it, and that's just our reality. And so the passing of time, the sands of time, Father Time, and those connections are now even in Greek connections, like back to Saturn or Kronos, and what he did to his father Uranus, and Saturn still connected with the scythe as well. But here are some older images of the Grim Reaper. Again, time with the clock, but he's also on the top. He's also carrying the hourglass and reaping with the scythe. You reap what you sow, and the Grim Reaper. On the bottom, you can also see the Reaper there with the scythe, but he's also carrying an hourglass which is winged. That's another symbol. We'll show that in a moment. It's just the same thing. It's just with wings on it. It's about the passing of time. This is a sundial at the Marulan marker here in Australia, a very important location in regards to timekeeping. Small town, but rich in symbolism there. And the sundial measuring time, the passing of time, and there we see Father Time with the scythe. Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be. So we come back, here are some other examples in graveyards. Again, the broken column, the book on top of the column. She's also holding the urn, and the sprig of acacia. The one on the right, it's either been broken off, or maybe it was like a metal one that's been removed or stolen, possibly. But we see just the same themes happening again. Called from labour to refreshment. So this is maybe like a funeral card, but it's Masonic or esoteric in that sense. Again, the hourglass, broken Corinthian column, the scythe. She's holding the book on the column, the urn, and the acacia. Might notice on the bottom right we see Jacob's ladder, and next to him there's a staircase, 3, 5 and 7 steps, and also next to that there are 5 columns, so 3, 5 steps. Well, those are the 5 Roman orders. So I've been mentioning Doric, Ionic and Corinthian. They're the 3 Greek orders. That's 3 of the 5, but there's also Tuscan and Composite, which go to make the 5 columns, the 5 pillars and orders of architecture. The 7 steps is usually connected to the 7 liberal arts, but there's a lot of 7 and symbolism as well. But at the bottom, note that there are 3 steps. We'll show that in a moment, because that's very common, especially in regards to the Weeping Virgin. Here's another example. So bottom right again, you'll notice 3, 5 and 7. And the 3 columns over here. Okay, Ionic, Doric and Corinthian. So Ionic, wisdom or the female, Doric, the male, masculine or strength, and Corinthian, which is the maiden, the virgin, the column of beauty. And this relates to a very important legend in, especially amongst Freemasons. That's the Hiram Abiff story and the building of the temple. Again, something you might want to read up a little bit more, because that's a long story and I'm not inside, so I can't tell you the secrets. If I was inside, I'd know the secrets, but I wouldn't tell you. Okay, but notice the grave here. So we see a coffin and also a sprig of acacia. And as she holds it there, that's a symbol in regards to Hiram Abiff. Not relevant for this moment, but you'll see whether it's Oddfellows, Buffaloes, Freemasons, these type of groups. The Ark is also another important one. Just overlay that there, because that smaller version was, you can see the all-seeing eye. Okay, so here's on the right, I'm not sure if it's a Freemason board or maybe a Mechanics or Oddfellows, because they do share a lot of symbols in that regard. But so on the right we have the large version of a Weeping Virgin. Now notice 1, 2, 3 steps, and in the centre of the tracing board on the left. Okay, no, this is an Oddfellows board. The shaking hand is usually a giveaway. Pretty sure it's an Oddfellows board. But again, in the centre, 1, 2, 3 steps, the scythe, hourglass, the book, the urn, the acacia, and the broken column. And just above also we have, it's maybe a bit hard to make out, WSB, the 3 orders. There's, call it W, wisdom is ionic. I've got an image for that just to help show. So wisdom is ionic, strength is Doric, and B is beauty, the Corinthian column, as we saw there, the 3 Greek orders. And usually Doric and Corinthian are on the outside, and ionic or wisdom is on the inside, but that's not here or there for the moment. So we come back to this Masonic tracing board, and again we see the 3 columns, this time with ionic in the centre, wisdom. But it's beauty, the maiden, the virgin, and the connection of the passing of the maiden, the grave marker, and the Corinthian acanthus link. So compare that to the Weeping Virgin. And so if we look at these 2 images now, the broken column, and again just to highlight the Corinthian order, because you can see I have a similarity there. Note there's a scythe down there, the hourglass, the 3 steps, which is so when you in Freemasons to become a Mason you become a Master Mason, and that's the 3rd rank. So you go through 3 steps to become a fully fledged Mason. And underneath that we see the coffin and the acacia. She's holding the sprig of acacia. Again, this has to do with the legend of the building of the temple in Jerusalem and Hiram Abiff. The only priests were allowed to enter the Holy of Holies. So to build it, priests had to be trained to become stonemasons. King Hiram, or Hiram Abiff, but it's mentioned in the Bible as King Hiram of Tyre. Just think right next door to Baalbek, they're up there in Lebanon. He brought his carpenters, he provided them with the cedars, the red cedars, and he provided them with stonemasons to teach them, so because they were not allowed to enter the most sacred precinct. And you can see you'll see it in churches, but also the pillar, Boaz and Yakim, but just different versions of Hiram, or Hiram Abiff, King Hiram, really essentially the same thing. Again with the compasses and the geometry and those connections to there. And there we see just a Masonic emblem with the coffin and the sprig of acacia, which was a grave marker in that case as well. I won't go into the Hiram Abiff legend, but you can look up the widow's son, would be another name for it. It's just a screenshot from Masonic Dictionary. And for instance, they mention in the Bible in Samuel 2, and Hiram of Tyre sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David a house. And well, you can just, again, I can only be really long if we go to all of these, but get King Hiram or Hiram Abiff, so the masonry being taught. So we come back to that image and how the Weeping Virgin, the 3 steps, and the story about the grave of Hiram Abiff and the acacia. Now there are different versions of exactly who Hiram really was. One that I find interesting is I had to pixelate this image out because it's a head of a mummy which has got injuries to the head, which match the story of how Hiram was murdered by his jet, because he wouldn't give up the secrets. You had to be a good man and pass the test to be worthy of the secrets, and there were jealous apprentices. They insisted on it, and then he was murdered. And so that's the tragedy of Hiram. What's the proper name? But yeah, second Enray, Tower the First. Some people, Robert Lomas and Christopher Knight, point to the similarity to the wounds in his head to the Hiram story, but I'm just pointing that out. There are different versions of it. I'm not an insider, but symbolism, mythology. It's what the legend has value in that. What it means, how it means and applied. A beautiful fiction story that carries information, carries some sort of moral tale, is just as valuable as a true story that has some morality behind it. Sometimes even more, because the story can be changed into the hero's journey type of thing. But anyway, funerary symbols. I'm showing here in the Masons, but you'll see it in churches. And just in general practice, in even secular funerals have a ritual to it as well, and the symbols tend to be the same. There are certain flowers you give on Valentine's Day, and there are certain flowers you bring to a funeral, and if you don't give the right ones, you can send the wrong message. But the key is these funerary symbols, and especially the Virgin and the Corinthian column, the Weeping Virgin, and the acanthus links as well, because it's, again, was a very common funerary symbol, but again just sort of was passed out of fashion. But again, this acanthus plant also being the origin. For those who have been watching for a while, I will get around to going into, because there's again secrets in plain sight. I'm sure people start to anyway. It's some really powerful, curious information that predates the Greco-Roman period as well. But here is Mortuary Station in Chippendale in Sydney. Now it's called Regent Street Station. They built this train station in the late 1800s, maybe right at the turn of the 20th century. What is Central Station now in Sydney used to be the major graveyard. As the city expanded, they moved out, and it's essentially a whole suburb called Rookwood, and it's the Rookwood necropolis, the city of the dead, and all the graves there were moved to Rookwood. And so from then on, and you'll find them in England and other probably a lot of places where there was a special train station set up just to deal with moving coffins and remains to the station, and some of them have got these really nice designs. So you see a close-up, you note the Corinthian columns, or now not true Roman Corinthian columns, they're more towards the sort of Gothic style of Corinthian, but you can see the acanthus leaves. It's the same symbols, just a different form. You can see around the outside we see the same leaf form as well. You can even see them on the there at the gates, and you'll note underneath at the gates as well the hourglass with the wings, as we saw with those other earlier versions of the Grim Reaper. So the hourglass, the sands of time, the passing of time, and mortuary symbolism. This is a cenotaph in Liverpool in Sydney. It's not a true. It's a war memorial, but it's not like a registered war memorial. When they redeveloped the mall, they moved this to another park, so it's an art installation, but it is very rich in symbolism, and includes a broken column and Remembrance Day, the end of World War I, was on the 11th of the 11th, November 11th, and the armistice began at 11 a.m. And this was designed in such a way, this broken column, that 11 a.m. on November 11th, the shadow would connect the stump with the broken column itself. And so, again, death, and especially in regards to memorials, war memorials and sacrifice. So again, the broken column. The Sandakan Memorial Park, Turramurra, Sydney. Sandakan Death March and the prisoners of war in the Australia, in the Pacific. And I knew the son of one of the few survivors of the Death March. Very interesting fellow, but to the side, a broken column. Might notice lichen growth. I'm going to do that because this is just down the road from the Sphinx Memorial, which is just a hop, skip and a jump from Gosford or Carry-On. Okay, broken column symbols. Sphinx Memorial, North Turramurra in Sydney. This was done in the began maybe the late 20s, 1930s. A soldier who come back from World War I, Australian soldier. He had a lot of injuries. Nearby was a soldiers' hospital, a convalescent hospital. He served in Egypt, and so you can see pictures, Australian soldiers there in World War I. The Sphinx there in the background. This was back when the Sphinx restoration hadn't begun. It was still just freshly dug, without the casing, like a few remaining casing stones. But notice that the headdress doesn't go to the shoulders. So when he made this, started carving this out, that's why it doesn't go down. And even the rump, you can see, is very similar to the original condition of a Sphinx when it was dug out in the late early 1900s. And this is a registered war memorial, but under the chest what we have is a broken column, again symbol of passing, symbol of death. And this is the altar just in front. Now this is again a hop, skip and a jump from Carry-On and the Gosford glyphs, and even the style of it. I'll do that as another video because that's a sitting duck. That one I did some a while ago. But in regards to lichen, the environmental conditions and what happens, Sydney sandstone, and there's no ancient glyphs in Gosford or Carry-On. It's just a physical impossibility given what type of stone and the weather conditions. That I was born in Gosford Hospital. I grew up in the area. It's just, anyway, I'm getting off target. But broken column symbolism, and so we return. We just go, so the Weeping Virgin, funerary symbolism, through esoteric traditions. But again, you go to any graveyard, you don't have to be whatever your opinion is, you don't need to be a Freemason. That these symbols are embedded in well, even the secular tradition will still carry through with most of them, but even especially talking about the West mainly here, the Christian, Judeo-Christian emblems and symbols in regards to funerary rites and practices. So that's pretty much it. And again, back to the acanthus and the Corinthian. And so when let's call it the Christian era begun, or even you can, for instance, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, they have Corinthian and Ionic columns inside, and you'll see that even in early Muslim architecture, they were still carrying through with direct Roman. Sometimes they're just literally grabbing Roman columns and putting them in the mosques, but also then they soon developed their own style, and the style did develop, but it's still, especially acanthus, is in Islamic architecture as well. Alrighty, so that's pretty much it for this video, and again I'll put the link to the Corinthian origin as well if you haven't seen it. This was just a bit of a follow through. This is our you don't need to believe in Zeus to realize that he's Greco or Jupiter, as the Romans called him, that this has a carry-on and has passed through even to the modern era as well. So with that, hope you enjoyed and have a good one.